Hi guys. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open this and say that if you have read the title of this post, which is right above, you may want to get out of here if this is not a kind of post that you find compelling. I am going to discuss one of the three things that we are told that as a polite society you are not to discuss. If you have been in this journal any length of time, you will know that I do discuss those three impolite things: religion, politics, and money. I brush on them on slight occasions. I already know that some of you will probably want to jump ship because I'm going to state right now, I am a liberal, dare I say it, socialist Democrat. And this isn't so much about that, but about my experience with that. And I'm going to brush on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart and how we are going to be missing out so much as a society now when he steps down, when he steps away. And we are really going to miss him during the 2016 election. Colbert taking over the Late Late Show is awesome. It's fantastic, but he's also going to be limited because he will no longer be with Comedy Central. He will be on a major network, and though they are looking for his caliber and they are hoping to ride the coattails, I guess, of his brand, he is still not going to be the Colbert Report. He will now be Late Night with Stephen Colbert, which there is going to be a difference. But I wanted to go ahead and warn you of this so that if you wanted to skip this post, you have every right to. You have every right to. I have all manner of people here on my live journal. I have independents, I have Democrats, I have Republicans, I have people who identify as none of these things. They identify as either conservative or as liberal or as socialist or as none of the above. They just really don't care. And I'm fine with that. I am cool with that. I am not a journalist, I am not a researcher, I am not an analyst, I am not any of these things, and I do not claim to be. I claim to have some modicum, not a whole lot, some modicum of intelligence and the ability to discourse intelligently, or monologue, as the case may be, intelligently on what I see as political arena and how, in a way, I became interested in it, and the scope and sphere of how I wade about in my pool of fact-checking, fact-finding, and where I get my information and how I come across it and how I view that information as it is dispensed to us by the media, liberal, conservative, or otherwise. To start off, as in with all things, my parents watched the news, they read newspapers, but it was, for me, I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but when I was growing up, things like the news, stuff like that, that was all background. It was background noise. It was just like music or some television shows, not all of them. Television shows have a tendency to grab me because it is a narrative combined with visual and audio, and it's designed to grab your attention and capture the imagination, whereas just music or somebody droning on and on and on about the deficit just doesn't do it. But it was part of my childhood. It was a backdrop of my childhood. With tales. When I was 10, I decided what I do and do not like, and I decided as an individual what I prefer to read, what I prefer to engage in when it comes to a fiction or a narrative, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. With music, I found my style and my taste, which is very, very varied. When I was about 13, I decided what I did and did not like as an individual. The political arena, I kind of touched on when I was a teenager, and that was during Rock the Vote. Of course, I wasn't old enough to vote, but I did know that I did not appreciate the way that HW viewed people who were below a certain age and a certain and within a certain demographic, and I didn't like his tone. I didn't like his manner. And I actually cheered when Clinton took over. I did vote for Clinton when he ran for his second term. But I wasn't really aware. I voted for him because I liked the job he was doing so far, and I identified as a Democrat. Well, I identify more as a liberal socialist in many ways than a Democrat now. And that's because a Democrat is a party. It is not a way of thinking. It is a party that claims a way of thinking, but often misses the mark, especially within the last decade. But when Clinton was in office, and I was, I mean, we're talking below the age of 20, I didn't have access to a lot of newspapers, to cable networks, or even local networks. I mean, television was something that was a little bit beyond us. We were in that kind of poor category. So I didn't have access to a whole lot of politics. All of our friends were very, very political in their own way, especially when I hit from like 22 on. All of my friends had an opinion. They would sit there and they would discuss their opinion. It's kind of like, whoosh, background noise. Just like when I was a kid, it was background noise. When Bush Jr. took over, I wasn't very pleased, and it kind of turned me off from the political arena, because I'm like, oh yeah, it says one thing, does another. And I'd come to take a cynical view on politics and how the political arena ran, only to be validated at a later date just by people who would talk about politics. Of course, I am particular. My mom, I grew up with, things like Bill O'Reilly and Walter Cronkite, and I will say that Walter Cronkite was one of the greatest journalists and newsmen. I may not have always agreed with everything he said, but what he said he believed in, and he came to the table with facts and integrity and an honesty that is just very, very rare, very, very rare in the political arena today. But then again, it's rather difficult to be honest and factual and report the news when you are not so much a news organization as you are a business. You can tag news on there, but you're a business. You are owned by a corporation who will go, well, we know our audience prefers this. We want you to report on things that have to do with this. And you certainly don't want to upset your employers by reporting something that will make them look bad. So it's less news nowadays. The Fifth Estate just really is no more. It is more political opinion, fluff pieces, and an arena where hypocrisy and confusion and corruption can just breed. There is no hiding underneath a rock in the dark and doing these things, because there is no light. Everything is under the rock. Everything is the dark. There is no light to shed on it, which is something that has been pointed out by things like The Daily Show. Now, I remember The Daily Show came out. Yeah, I remember that. I remember watching it when it first came on. And I remember when Jon Stewart took over, and that was a show I always enjoyed, but once again, I didn't really engage. Not really. It's not that I disagreed. It's not that I completely agreed. It's that I just didn't engage. When Barack Obama went to go run for political office, all of a sudden, I don't even, I can't even pinpoint the date. I can't even pinpoint how, where, or why. I just know that it was around this time. I actually started to engage. I was a bit of a late bloomer in that respect, but I started to engage. And to give you a further point, in fact, hubby and I have not had cable television in about 5 or 6 years. That's how long we've been without it. A lot of our news and sources of news come from over the internet. anything that or if we're over at a friend's house and you know, and we see something on the news, and the Daily Show is like a thing that has always been running and always been in the background. And I'm going, the reason why I think that I'm posting on this is because this is something that as a society we're going to miss, and we don't even realize it, whether you watch the show or not. This has been pointed out by many newscasters, by many interviewers, and it just, I mean, they dance all around it, but they can't quite put their finger on it. People like Stewart, not exactly like, but his forebears, his predecessors, within political satire, have always been there. They've always been needed. You have always needed somebody who will stand there and point out what is wrong, be the voice of the people, be the voice of the majority, in many ways. I don't know how many times I've watched the show and I've been like, you know, I never quite thought of it like that, but that actually fits. You know, I couldn't voice it. I couldn't put it down on paper and go, this is what I'm thinking, and he said it for me perfectly. So I didn't really come to appreciate just how very much he not only coincided with my political views, but he colored how I felt about politics to begin with. I mean, I displayed no interest. I did not care. But he made me care about little things here and there. So, of course, in the end, he's going to make me care about politics and how it affects me, how it affects the people around me. We need that. When he's gone, we will no longer have that. I love Rachel Maddow. I love, of course, you know, I grew up watching a lot of Fox News and a lot of the conservative side of the table. But for some reason, I identify with the liberal side of the table just a little bit more. So I love Rachel Maddow. I love the Colbert Report, which is supposed to be the conservative side of, you know, the Daily Show. It's supposed to be the Daily Show and the Colbert Report, and it's supposed to be Democrat versus Republican. And it works, but at the same time, they're kind of poking fun at themselves. And I love that. I love that, and that's needed. And the Colbert Report is not going to be there to cover that aspect for us anymore. So we're going to have nothing. We needed this. We didn't realize we needed this until here recently. And I'll tell you why, because it became background. It became part of who we are. The Daily Show became so much a part of our political culture, so much a part of our social culture. It just wove its way in there silently. We didn't even realize it. But it's needed. Now, Stewart himself has defined himself not as a newscaster, but as a comedian. And he's doing a job politically satirizing the news, which, you know, I mean, he's not wrong. This is exactly what he does. This was exactly the aim and the intention. He did not intend to be the source for the news for people my age and younger. He didn't intend that, but that's what happened. He didn't intend for, if you watch his show, you will be honing your intellect. You will be more aware of the world around you than, say, if you watch any other news show 24/7. His 22 to 25-minute segments have sparked more discussions and more debates, have honed more questions. More people are thinking for themselves and asking themselves questions and thinking in different ways because of this show. And as he's put it, he's not a newscaster. He's watching the newscaster, and along with the rest of the audience, which is us, he's, you know, tossing spitballs at the guy. But I think that even Jon Stewart has missed the idea, and this is something that everybody keeps dancing around, but nobody quite lands on. I think he's missed the idea that he became more than what he started out as. He is more than what he intended to be. He is a comedian first and foremost. It is a show that pokes fun at the news and is designed to look like the news while it does it. He has never claimed to be a news program. He has always claimed to be The Daily Show. And with Jon Stewart was tagged on when he came on. The Colbert Report is not even listed as news. The bad thing is you have a lot of news organizations out there that shouldn't be listed as news. The great irony about The Daily Show is that the people who watch it know more about what's going on in the world, know more about how to think for themselves and come to decisions for themselves on what they see around them, but be able to pick out the bullshit from the tiny grain of truth that happens to lie in there somewhere, than anybody who watches any other news network. That's the irony. The irony is this is a comedy show that is news. It is a news show. That's not what they say they are, but that's what they turned out to be. They turned out to be the information givers. And yeah, I mean, they're poking fun at it and they've got opinions. They're allowed to do that because they're not a news show. They are a political comedy. They are satire. They are poking fun at the whole system, politicians, corporations. They are shining that light all over and saying there is no more rock. Corruption, greed, violence, these are things that are out there now, and everybody's taking it for granted, and nobody's looking at it. But we're going to keep shining that light until you see it. And we're not going to stop like other news organizations are going to do. We're not going to stop doing that. We're going to keep pointing it out until, something clicks, until you get it. And I like that. I find it ironic that you have actual news corporations who have news in their body, it's right there in the title, but they're no more news than The Daily Show was. When you have a corporate entity that owns you, even if the intention is not there, you are going to throttle back on actual facts that may either hurt your employer or hurt a business that your employer associates with, I guess is the best way to put it. You are not going to give 100% of the facts as they're out there on all the things you need to give those facts on, because you are not the fifth estate. You are a business. Your job is to generate as much money as possible and to keep as much of the demographic, however widespread or narrow or whatever, as possible, and keep those funds pouring in from other corporations that are funding the corporation that pays you. But you're not actually the news. Honesty, integrity, fact-finding, fact-sharing, shining that light into the dark, giving forth information even if it's not something that anyone wants to hear, because it's there and because it should be heard, and because the American public, or any public, national, international, should be listening to it, should hear the facts and be able to decide for themselves what those facts mean. That is what the news is. That is what it is. That is what it's supposed to be. But when you have a corporation that owns journalists and journalism and media and the idea of fact sharing and fact finding, and because that corporation may have other interests that can be affected by the information you're disseminating, in any other arena that's known as conflict of interest, you cannot be the news and stop the news from being shared. But that's what's happening. Walter Cronkite was one of great last reporters, because he bucked the system. It didn't make a difference who paid him, who didn't. It didn't make a difference what they thought, because that's not the news. Your opinion or what you think about the information that's being given is not the point. Walter Cronkite, of course, towards the end of his last, decade or so, he had that kind of pull. He had the ability to do that. I mean, his name is Walter Cronkite. He is the news. So he could afford to do that. Jon Stewart can afford to do that because he's not the news. The great irony is, though, is that the news isn't the news. The people who are giving us the news, they aren't the news. And they want to be. A lot of your journalists out there, a lot of your reporters, most of the people who are in media, mainstream or otherwise, they do what they can to fact find, gather that information, and get it to the public. Whether or not they can actually share it is up to their bosses. And their bosses have to answer to the bosses above them. And 9 times out of 10, the bosses above them aren't there for news, for the sharing of information, for the exchange of ideas, for discourse and debate, for political relevance, for discussion and thinking about where our world is and where it is going and how we fit into it. That's not what they're thinking about. What they're thinking about is that bottom line. And where are their profits going to fall into that? That's what they're thinking about. So the guy below them, whose job is to actually share that news with us, well, he can't very well do that. The great irony is that you have, at least for a little while longer, a show that wasn't there to do that job. They were there to make fun of the fact that job wasn't being done by everybody else. They danced all around the point deliberately, but they pointed it out. This is the reason why you're not getting the information you should be getting. Because the guy above this guy that's giving you the news is telling him in a not so subtle way sometimes, and in subtle ways at other times, this is what the news is, this is how you will share it, this is a business, not a news network first. It is a business first and news network second. But here you had a comedian who was a comedian first and a disseminator of information second. But he used that dissemination of information in his comedy, and yet somehow he accomplished something that has been so rare in the last 40 years. He reported the news. Didn't make a difference how he did it. He still did it. More of us are more aware and informed and enlightened and inspired and entertained in ways we never were before by somebody who's giving us the facts. See, Jon Stewart made the money by taking the lack of facts and showing it to you and poking fun at that. That was his job. See this politician, see this corporation? You know how they're fucking up? Let me inform you. And then we'll make it into a segment that's hilarious, and yet we'll stick in here, and you're going to go home and discuss it with your friends, with your family, or you are going to sit there and you're going to think about this, and you're going to create a vid post that puts forth that idea and goes, that is one of the greatest ironies of the last 100 years. And there are many ironies. We actually have businesses that dispense the news without dispensing the news. And we have a fake news desk that dispenses comedy using the news you didn't get anywhere else and making that comedy by pointing that little fact out. I'll probably be doing another vid like this not too long from now when Mr. Stewart is gone. I have not had the privilege of sitting down and watching his show night after night after night for many years. I spent today catching up on that. That's why you haven't seen me, is because I've been caught here and there on YouTube. Oh, I didn't see this, and I didn't see this. And watching him on other shows, still pointing out, this is what I do. This is what you do. And somehow, always, in some form or another, being right. His honesty and his integrity shone through. He was a comedian who was poking fun at politicians and corporations, and he was a fake news desk. As he put it, he came on after puppets that made crank phone calls, and yet he is the voice of America, and he had been for 16 years. What's really tragic about comedy is how comedy focuses on the tragedy and shines a light on it and gives us a moment to breathe and to go, well, we'll see the funny side about that, and we will work on those problems and we will move on. The only problem is there is no other Jon Stewart. They'll put somebody else to head the Daily Show, and I'm sure they'll be good. But they won't be Jon Stewart. They won't be our political satirist standing in the streets of Rome telling you what's wrong with the Senate. They won't be what we've needed for so long and what has sustained us for so long and taught us so much. We're going to lose something great, and nobody realizes it. That's where I think the real tragedy is. And no matter the ironies and the differences between all these news networks and this one little show that was just a comedy show, this one isn't funny.